In the vast expanse of the Galactic Coalition, where 1,000 different species mingled in the markets of distant worlds, there existed one universal truth that every alien knew by heart: humans were the galaxy's most feared warriors. Their reputation preceded them across star systems: ruthless, unpredictable, and absolutely terrifying in combat. They were the species you hired when diplomacy failed and you needed someone who could turn the tide of any conflict. But what happens when the galaxy's most notorious warrior princess, heir to the Zephyrian Empire's throne, shocked the entire galactic community by announcing her marriage to one of these legendary human fighters? What could possibly drive Princess Lyralii, known for her strategic brilliance and commanding presence, to bind herself to a creature that most civilized beings cross star systems to avoid? The answer would challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity, love, and what it truly means to be strong. Because sometimes, the most dangerous warriors carry the gentlest hearts, and the most feared species in the galaxy might just be the key to saving it all. This is the story of how one unexpected marriage between worlds would reshape the destiny of an entire galaxy, one tender moment at a time. The crystalline halls of the Zephyrian Palace had seen many shocking announcements over the centuries, but none quite like this one. Princess Lyralii stood before the assembled Galactic Council, her ethereal blue skin shimmering under the palace's bioluminescent chandeliers, her four graceful arms gesturing as she spoke words that would echo across 1,000 star systems. Distinguished members of the Galactic Coalition, her melodic voice carried the authority of someone born to rule empires. I stand before you today to announce my engagement to Captain Marcus Chen of the Terran Defense Corps. The silence that followed was so complete that one could hear the gentle hum of the palace's quantum generators. Ambassador Threek of the Mollusk Confederation was the first to recover, his tentacles writhing in obvious distress as he spoke through his translation device. Your Highness, his mechanical voice crackled with disbelief, surely you cannot be serious. Humans are, they are. Warriors, finished Ambassador Zelthran of the Silicon Courts, his metallic features unable to hide his shock. Violent, unpredictable creatures who solve problems with brute force and primitive weapons. Princess Lyralii's expression remained serene, though those who knew her well could detect the steel beneath her calm exterior. Captain Chen is indeed a warrior, Ambassador Zelthran. He is also the being who saved my life and taught me that true strength comes not from conquest, but from protection. The revelation sent ripples of whispered conversation throughout the assembly. How could the heir to one of the galaxy's most peaceful and advanced civilizations have encountered a human warrior, let alone fallen in love with one? Ambassador Vex of the Crystalline Authority leaned forward, her faceted features catching the light as she spoke. Princess, with all due respect, your people have maintained neutrality in galactic conflicts for over 3,000 years. The Zephyrians are known throughout the galaxy for their diplomacy, their art, their philosophy. How does a human warrior fit into this legacy? Before Lyralii could respond, a new voice echoed through the chamber, deep, measured, and distinctly human. Perhaps I can answer that question myself. Every head in the assembly turned as Captain Marcus Chen entered the hall. He was not what most of them had expected. Standing just over 6 feet tall, he moved with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and his brown eyes held an intelligence that surprised many of the assembled aliens. He wore not the battle armor they had expected, but a simple dress uniform that spoke of dignity rather than intimidation. Honored delegates, Marcus said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, I understand your surprise. I know what stories are told about my species across the galaxy. Some of them are even true. A nervous chuckle rippled through the assembly. Ambassador Threek's tentacles coiled tighter around his speaking device. Captain Chen, forgive our directness, but humans have a reputation for aggressive problem-solving. The Battle of Zirion Prime, the Siege of the Crimson Nebula, the pacification of the Raider clans, these are not the achievements of a diplomatic species. Marcus nodded slowly. No, they're not. They're the achievements of a species that believes some things are worth fighting for. But there's more to humanity than our ability to wage war, just as there's more to any species than their most famous characteristic. He turned to look at Princess Lyralii, and something in his expression caused several of the more empathically sensitive aliens to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The look he gave her was one of pure adoration, tinged with a protectiveness that ran deeper than mere attraction. 3 months ago, Marcus continued, I was assigned to escort a diplomatic mission to the neutral zone. Pirates had been attacking trade routes, and the coalition needed someone to ensure safe passage for the peace negotiations. I expected a routine mission, patrol the boundaries, maybe chase off some raiders, go home. His expression grew distant as he recalled the memory. What I found instead was a burning ship in the void, its distress beacon crying out into the darkness. The vessel was Zephyrian, carrying Princess Lyralii back from a humanitarian mission to the Outer Rim colonies. She had been bringing medical supplies and cultural exchange programs to species ravaged by the recent conflicts. Ambassador Zelfrin's metallic features shifted into what might have been surprise. The Crimson Raiders' ambush in the Talos system. We heard rumors of survivors, but the official reports were classified at Princess Lyralii's request, Marcus confirmed. She didn't want the attack to interfere with the ongoing peace negotiations. Even as her ship burned around her, her first concern was for the continuation of diplomatic relations. Princess Lyralii stepped forward, her forearms gracefully folding in the traditional Zephyrian gesture of humble respect. Captain Shen's ship responded to our distress call. By the time he arrived, our life support was failing, and several of my diplomatic staff were critically injured. The raiders had damaged our medical bay beyond repair. So you saved her, Ambassador Vex observed, her crystalline voice tinkling like wind chimes. A noble rescue, certainly, but hardly the foundation for such a significant alliance. Marcus smiled, an expression that seemed to transform his entire face, making him appear younger and, somehow, more approachable. The rescue was just the beginning. Princess Lyralii could have simply thanked me and departed when we reached the nearest coalition station. Instead, she chose to stay aboard my ship while her diplomatic staff received treatment. I was curious, Lyralii admitted, a faint luminescence appearing along her skin, a Zephyrian expression of mild embarrassment. I had heard so many stories about human warriors, but I had never actually met one. Captain Shan and his crew were different from what I expected. Ambassador Threek's tentacles writhed with what his species considered deep thought. Different how, Your Highness? Princess Lyralii moved to stand beside Marcus, her height requiring her to look up at him despite her regal bearing. I expected brutality, but I found discipline. I expected aggression, but I found protection. I expected a crew of violent soldiers, but I found a family that would die for each other and for complete strangers in need. She gestured toward Marcus with two of her arms while the others remained formally positioned. Captain Shen's ship responded to 17 distress calls during my week aboard his vessel. 17 times, he and his crew risked their lives for beings they had never met and would likely never see again. They saved a mollusk colony ship with failing engines, protected a Silicon Authority mining vessel from raiders, and even helped deliver emergency supplies to a quarantined world during a plague outbreak. The assembly was beginning to look uncomfortable. These were not the actions they associated with the fearsome human warriors of galactic legend. Marcus noticed their discomfort and addressed it directly. Honored delegates, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about my species. Yes, humans are capable of great violence when necessary. Yes, we excel at warfare when pushed to it. But that's not because we love violence, it's because we love what violence can protect. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Every human warrior you've heard about, every battle we've fought, every conflict we've ended, they all had one thing in common. We were fighting to protect something or someone we considered worth dying for. Ambassador Zelfrin's metallic fingers drummed against the table in his species' equivalent of nervous energy. But, surely, Captain, you must understand the concerns of the coalition. Humans have only been part of galactic society for 2 centuries, yet in that time, you've been involved in more conflicts than any other species. Because conflict finds those who can end it, Princess Lyralii interjected firmly. The Crimson Raiders attacked my ship because they knew the Zephyrian Empire would not retaliate with violence. They calculated that they could strike at us with impunity, that our commitment to peace made us weak. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed with controlled anger. They were wrong. Our commitment to peace doesn't make us weak, it makes us valuable. And, Captain Shin taught me that sometimes, the greatest act of peace is having someone willing to fight for it. The chamber fell silent again as the assembled delegates absorbed this perspective. It was Ambassador Vex who finally spoke, her crystalline voice thoughtful. Princess, you speak of Captain Chen as if he represents all of humanity. But surely one individual cannot embody an entire species' character. Marcus and Lyrelii exchanged a look that spoke of shared understanding. Ambassador Vex, Marcus said carefully, during my time with Princess Lyrelii, I've learned that her people have a saying, to know the river, taste a single drop. You're right that I can't represent all of humanity. But I can show you what we aspire to be. He gestured toward the assembly with both hands, a gesture that somehow managed to include everyone present. Every species in this room has made remarkable contributions to galactic civilization. The Zephyrians brought us art and philosophy that has enriched countless worlds. The Mollusk Confederation gifted us biotechnology that has saved billions of lives. The Silicon Authority provided the computational frameworks that allow our diverse species to communicate and cooperate. His voice grew stronger, more confident. Humanity's contribution has been to stand guard while you made these gifts to the galaxy. We've taken the dark spaces between stars where pirates lurk, the dangerous frontiers where raiders prey on the innocent, and we've made them safe. Not because we enjoy war, but because we understand that peace requires vigilance. Princess Lyrelii stepped closer to Marcus, her forearms creating an elegant frame as she addressed the assembly. This is what I learned during my time aboard Captain Chen's ship. I learned that strength and gentleness are not opposites, they are partners. I learned that the most fearsome warriors are often the most compassionate protectors. And I learned that sometimes, love finds us in the most unexpected places. The last comments sent another wave of surprised murmurs through the assembly. Ambassador Threek spoke what many were thinking. Your Highness, this is all very touching. But the Zephyrian Empire has maintained its position in galactic politics through careful neutrality. An alliance with humanity is not an alliance with humanity, Lyrelii interrupted firmly. It is an alliance with Marcus Chen, the individual who has shown me what it means to love someone enough to fight for them, to protect them, to stand between them and harm even when the odds are impossible. She turned to face the assembly fully, her regal bearing evident in every graceful movement. The Zephyrian Empire will continue its commitment to peace and neutrality in galactic affairs. But Princess Lyrelii, the individual, not the political entity, has chosen to bind her life to someone who represents the finest qualities of human courage and honor. Marcus reached out and gently took one of her hands in both of his, a gesture that appeared tender rather than possessive. I know this announcement raises questions and concerns. I know that many of you wonder whether this union represents a shift in Zephyrian policy, or whether it signals some kind of human expansion into coalition politics. He looked around the assembly, meeting the gaze of each delegate in turn. I can only tell you this, I love Princess Lyrelii for who she is, not what she represents. I would protect her with my life whether she were royalty or a simple citizen, whether she commanded fleets or tended gardens. And I will never ask her to compromise her people's values or her own moral convictions for my sake. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and several of the more empathically sensitive species in the assembly shifted uncomfortably as they felt the genuine emotion behind his words. Ambassador Vex was the first to break the contemplative silence that followed. Captain Chen, Princess Lyrelii, while your personal feelings are admirable, surely you understand that this union will be seen as politically significant regardless of your private intentions. Princess Lyrelii's markings dimmed slightly, a sign of deep consideration among her people. Ambassador Vex raises a valid concern. Perhaps it would be helpful for the assembled delegates to understand exactly how Captain Chen and I intend to navigate the intersection of our personal relationship and our respective duties. She gestured to Marcus, who nodded and stepped forward. Honored delegates, Princess Lyrelii and I have spent considerable time discussing this very issue. We understand that our marriage cannot exist in a political vacuum, and we have no intention of pretending otherwise. He paused, choosing his words carefully. However, we want to make it clear that this union represents a bridge between our peoples, not a merger of our governments. Princess Lyrelii will remain committed to Zephyrian values of peace and diplomatic resolution. I will continue to serve in the Terran Defense Corps, protecting coalition trade routes and responding to threats against civilian populations. Princess Lyrelii picked up the thread seamlessly. What changes is that we will face these duties together, supporting each other while maintaining our individual commitments. Captain Chen will not ask me to abandon my people's path of peace, and I will not ask him to abandon his duty to protect the innocent. Ambassador Threek's tentacles had begun to relax slightly, though his mechanical voice still carried notes of uncertainty. And if your respective duties come into conflict? If Zephyrian interests clash with human military operations? Marcus and Lyrelii exchanged another of those meaningful looks. Then, we will find a third path, Marcus said simply. One of the things Princess Lyrelii has taught me is that when two options both lead to harm, the answer is usually to find an option that no one has considered yet. And, Captain Chen has taught me that sometimes, the most peaceful solution requires someone to stand ready to fight for it, Lyrelii added. We believe that our different strengths can complement each other rather than conflict. The assembly continued to murmur among themselves, but the tone was shifting from shock and concern toward curiosity and cautious acceptance. Ambassador Zelthrin spoke what many were thinking. This is unprecedented. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, we have never seen such a union between species with such different approaches to conflict resolution. Princess Lyrelii smiled, an expression that caused her facial markings to pulse with soft light. Perhaps that is exactly why it is needed, Ambassador Zelthrin. Perhaps the galaxy has become too comfortable with the idea that our differences must divide us rather than strengthen us. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. We don't claim to have all the answers. We don't even claim that our approach will work for others. We only know that we have found something precious in each other, and we believe that love, real, committed, selfless love, is always worth fighting for. As the assembly prepared to adjourn, Ambassador Vex rose from her crystalline seat. Captain Chen, Princess Lyrelii, while many questions remain, I think I speak for the assembled delegates when I say that your commitment to each other, and to your respective peoples, is evident. She paused, her faceted features catching the chamber's lights. The crystalline authority will be honored to witness your union, and we look forward to seeing how this unprecedented alliance develops. Similar statements of cautious support echoed from around the chamber as the delegates began to file out, their conversations animated by the unexpected revelations of the day. As the great hall emptied, Marcus and Lyrelii remained standing together, her forearms creating a circle of protection around their joined hands. That went better than I expected, Marcus murmured, his voice barely audible even in the now quiet chamber. Did it? Lyrelii asked with gentle amusement. Half the galaxy now believes I've lost my mind, and the other half thinks you're plotting some kind of elaborate human takeover of the Zephyrian Empire. Marcus chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. When you put it that way, I suppose we've got our work cut out for us. Princess Lyrelii turned to face him fully, her luminescent markings pulsing with what Marcus had learned was her expression of deep affection. Marcus Chen, when I first met you, I thought I understood what strength looked like. I thought it was my people's ability to maintain peace through wisdom and diplomacy. I thought it was the Silicon Authority's computational power or the Mollusk Confederation's biological mastery. She reached up to touch his face with her upper right hand, her skin warm and slightly luminescent where it contacted his. You taught me that true strength is the courage to love someone completely, knowing that love makes you vulnerable. You taught me that the most powerful force in the galaxy isn't technology or weapons or political maneuvering, it's the willingness to put someone else's well-being ahead of your own. Marcus covered her hand with his own. And you taught me that peace isn't weakness, Lyrelii. You taught me that there's more courage in choosing diplomacy over violence than in choosing violence over diplomacy. You showed me that the strongest people are those who have the power to destroy their enemies and choose instead to help them find a better path. As they stood together in the vast, empty chamber where the fate of their union had just been debated by representatives of 1,000 worlds, neither of them could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. The galaxy was vast and full of those who would see their love as a threat to the established order. But, in that moment, surrounded by the fading echoes of surprised voices and uncertain promises, they knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever the future brought, they would face it together. 3 months after the shocking announcement that had rippled across the galaxy, the Zephyrian homeworld of Ethros hummed with unprecedented activity. The planet's floating cities, normally serene islands of crystal and living light drifting through the perpetual twilight of their tidally locked world, buzzed with preparations for what many were calling the wedding of the millennium. Princess Lyralei stood in the center of her private chambers, surrounded by a whirlwind of activity that would have overwhelmed most beings. Her forearms moved in perfect coordination as she directed the final preparations, each gesture graceful and purposeful. Royal attendants floated through the room on their gossamer wings, their movements like a carefully choreographed dance as they attended to countless details. "Your Highness," chirped Melody, her personal aide whose iridescent feathers shifted color with her emotional state, "the crystalline authorities delegation has arrived, and they've brought a gift that's causing quite a stir among the palace staff." Lyralei paused in her examination of ceremonial arrangements, her lower two arms settling into a position of curious attention. What kind of gift could possibly cause a stir among people who've seen diplomatic presents from every corner of the galaxy? Melody's feathers shifted to a nervous shade of purple. They've grown a living crystal garden that apparently responds to human emotions. The garden blooms differently when Captain Chen approaches it. The crystallographers are calling it a sympathetic resonance phenomenon, but the palace gardeners are convinced it's some kind of magic. A soft laugh escaped Lyralei's lips, causing her facial markings to pulse with gentle amusement. Marcus would find that fascinating. He's been studying Zephyrian bioluminescence for months, trying to understand how our emotions manifest in light. I think he would appreciate a gift that bridges our different ways of expressing feeling. Through the tall windows of her chamber, Lyralei could see the guest ships arriving in the planet's orbit. Vessels from dozens of species filled the space around Ethros, their varied designs creating a beautiful tapestry against the star-filled void. Each ship represented not just a government delegation, but often entire cultural movements curious about this unprecedented union. "Melody, have you received any word from Captain Chen's ship?" The aide's feathers shifted to a warm golden color. "The Terran delegation arrived 2 hours ago. Captain Chen is currently in meetings with your father and the Council of Elders. According to Palace Security, the discussions are going surprisingly well." Lyralei felt a familiar flutter of nervous energy. Her father, Emperor Zephys the Wise, had initially been deeply skeptical of her choice. Not because of any personal dislike for Marcus, but because he understood the political implications better than anyone. The Zephyrian Empire's neutrality had been their greatest strength for millennia, and many feared that this marriage would compromise that carefully maintained position. A soft chime indicated someone requesting entry to her chambers. "Enter," Lyralei called, and was surprised to see her younger brother, Prince Astron, approaching with what appeared to be a human woman in tow. "Sister," Astron said, his two arms folded in the formal gesture of respect, while his other two spread wide in the informal gesture of family affection, "I would like you to meet Commander Sarah Chen, Captain Chen's sister." Lyralei felt her markings pulse with surprised delight as she turned to face the human woman. Sarah Chen was shorter than Marcus, with the same dark hair and intelligent brown eyes, but, where Marcus carried himself with the controlled readiness of a warrior, Sarah moved with the confident precision of someone accustomed to command in different ways. "Commander Chen," Lyralei said, using her upper arms to perform the traditional Zephyrian greeting while her lower arms remained in a more casual position, "Marcus has spoken of you often. He told me you're a ship's engineer with the Terran fleet?" Sarah stepped forward with a smile that transformed her entire face, much like her brother's did. "Please, call me Sarah. And, yes, I keep the fleet's ships running while Marcus keeps their crew safe. It's nice to finally meet the woman who managed to capture my brother's heart." Based on his stories, I was expecting someone at least 9 feet tall with laser vision. The unexpected humor caused Lyralei's markings to flare with delighted surprise. "I'm sorry to disappoint. I'm only 7 feet tall, and my vision is entirely conventional." "Well," Sarah said with mock seriousness, "I suppose I can overlook the height difference. But Marcus did warn me about your devastating smile." Prince Astron watched this exchange with obvious fascination. As a student of xenobiology and cultural exchange, he had been more supportive of his sister's choice than many in the royal family, but even he had been curious about human family dynamics. "Commander Chen," he said, "forgive my curiosity, but, in human culture, is it common for siblings to approve of each other's choice of marriage partners?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "It depends on the family, Your Highness. In our case, Marcus and I have looked out for each other since we were children. Our parents died in a transport accident when we were young, so we learned to rely on each other pretty heavily." She glanced toward Lyralii with an expression of frank evaluation. I'll admit, when Marcus first told me he was planning to marry an alien princess, my first thought was that he'd finally lost his mind. But then, he started talking about her, and... Lyralii prompted, genuinely curious about this outside perspective on their relationship. And I realized I'd never heard him talk about anyone the way he talked about you, Sarah finished simply. Marcus has always been protective of others, but, with you, it's different. He doesn't talk about protecting you so much as he talks about growing with you, learning from you, becoming better because of you. The sincerity in Sarah's voice caused Lyralii's markings to pulse with a deep, warm light. That means more to me than I can express, Sarah. Your brother has changed my understanding of what it means to be strong, what it means to be brave, what it means to love someone completely. Prince Astron cleared his throat gently. Sister, I hate to interrupt this moment, but Father asked me to inform you that the ceremony preparations are nearly complete. The delegates are gathering in the Crystal Gardens for the pre-ceremony reception. Lyralii nodded, then turned back to Sarah. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me to the reception? I confess I'm somewhat nervous about meeting so many representatives from different species, and it would be comforting to have Marcus's sister nearby. Sarah's smile was warm and genuine. I'd be honored, Princess. And, for what it's worth, you don't need to be nervous. Anyone who can handle Marcus at his most stubborn can probably handle a few diplomatic conversations. As they made their way through the palace corridors toward the Crystal Gardens, Lyralii found herself appreciating this glimpse into Marcus's family background. Sarah's easy humor and obvious affection for her brother helped her understand where Marcus had learned to balance strength with gentleness. The Crystal Gardens were unlike anything else in the galaxy. Vast domes of living crystal grew from the palace's foundation, their transparent walls providing stunning views of the planet's eternal twilight while their interior spaces bloomed with plants that existed nowhere else in known space. Bioluminescent flowers responded to the emotions of those nearby, creating a constantly shifting display of colors and patterns that reflected the mood of any gathering. As Lyralii entered the gardens, she was struck by the unprecedented sight before her. Representatives from over 30 species mingled throughout the space, their varied forms creating a living mosaic of galactic diversity. But what captured her attention most was the way the garden itself was responding to their presence. Near the Mollusk Confederation's delegation, the flowers bloomed in deep, contemplative purples and blues. Around the Silicon Authority representatives, crystalline plants chimed with soft, harmonic tones that seemed to resonate with their hosts' computational thought processes. The Aquatic Coalition's envoys were surrounded by flowering vines that seemed to flow like water, their movements hypnotic and soothing. But most remarkable of all was the area where Marcus stood with her father and several other dignitaries. The plants around them pulsed with warm golds and deep reds, colors that Lyralii associated with trust, respect, and growing friendship. As she approached the group, she caught the tail end of a conversation between Marcus and Ambassador Threek of the Mollusk Confederation. Never considered that perspective before, Captain Chen, the ambassador was saying, his tentacles arranged in a pattern that indicated deep thought among his species. The idea that protective instincts could evolve independently across species with such different evolutionary backgrounds is fascinating. Marcus noticed Lyralii's approach and his entire expression brightened, causing the flowers around him to pulse with additional warmth. Ambassador Threek, I'd like you to meet Princess Lyralii. Lyralii, the ambassador was just explaining how mollusk protective behaviors evolved from their early oceanic environment. Emperor Zethys turned toward his daughter with an expression of paternal pride mixed with something that might have been relief. My daughter, Captain Chen, has been illuminating. His insights into cross-species psychology have been remarkably sophisticated. Lyralii performed a formal greeting to Ambassador Threek while keeping most of her attention on her father's expression. Emperor Zethys had ruled the Zephyrian Empire for over 2 centuries, and she had learned to read his moods and the subtle shifts of his luminescence patterns. Right now, those patterns suggested surprised approval. Ambassador Threek, she said warmly, I hope you'll find our ceremony interesting from an anthropological perspective. We've tried to blend Zephyrian and human traditions in ways that honor both cultures. Indeed, Your Highness, the ambassador replied. I confess I'm particularly curious about the symbolic elements you've chosen to represent the union of such different species. Marcus stepped closer to Lyralii, not possessively but companionably, like two people who had learned to move together in perfect harmony. We've decided to focus on the things that unite all sentient species, Ambassador. The ceremony will emphasize commitment, protection, growth, and the choice to face the future together. Rather than focusing on our differences, Lyralii added, we want to celebrate the ways our different strengths can complement each other. Zephyrian ceremonies traditionally emphasize harmony and balance, while human ceremonies often focus on commitment and protection. We've woven both themes together. Ambassador Vex of the Crystalline Authority approached their group, her faceted features reflecting the garden's changing lights and beautiful patterns. Princess, Captain Chen, I wanted to thank you for accepting our gift. The Resonance Garden has already begun adapting to the emotional atmosphere of your palace. Our crystallographers are quite excited by the data they're collecting. It's a beautiful gift, Ambassador, Marcus said sincerely. I've never seen anything like the way the crystals respond to different emotional states. The patterns they create are almost like a visual language. In a way, they are, Ambassador Vex replied. Crystalline emotional expression manifests in harmonic frequencies that create geometric patterns. Your human emotional patterns produce frequencies we've never recorded before. Emperor Zethys leaned forward with interest. Different how, Ambassador? More layered, Your Majesty, Ambassador Vex explained. Human emotions appear to exist on multiple levels simultaneously. Captain Chen's emotional signature shows primary feelings overlaid with complex analytical processing and protective awareness patterns. It's quite remarkable. Lyralii felt a flush of pride as she looked at Marcus. She had always been impressed by his emotional complexity, the way he could feel deeply while still thinking clearly, but it was fascinating to hear it described from the perspective of a species that literally processed emotions as mathematical constructs. That's one of the things I love most about him, she said simply, causing her markings to pulse with soft affection. He feels everything completely, but he never lets emotion cloud his judgment. A new voice joined the conversation as Prince Astron approached with Sarah Chen and several other guests. Sister, I've been introducing Commander Chen to some of our xenobiology experts. They're fascinated by her insights into human engineering philosophy. Sarah looked slightly overwhelmed but pleased. I have to admit, Your Highness, I wasn't expecting to spend the evening discussing comparative approaches to starship design, but your experts have some fascinating theories about organic versus mechanical engineering. Sarah's been explaining how human engineers approach problems, Prince Astron continued enthusiastically. Apparently, humans tend to build redundant systems and plan for catastrophic failures in ways that most species don't. Marcus chuckled. We're paranoid that way. We always assume something's going to go wrong, so we try to build systems that can keep working even when they're damaged. It's a fascinating philosophy, Emperor Zethys observed. Most species engineer for optimal performance under ideal conditions. Humans seem to engineer for survival under the worst possible conditions. Because we've learned that the worst possible conditions have a way of happening, Sarah added pragmatically. Better to be prepared and not need it than to need it and not have it. Ambassador Threek's tentacles coiled in what Lyralii recognized as his species' expression of sudden understanding. This perspective explains much about human military tactics as well. You don't just plan to win battles, you plan to survive losing them. We plan to not lose them, Marcus corrected gently. But, yes, we always have fallback positions, escape routes, and contingency plans. Every engagement has primary, secondary, and emergency objectives. And, yet, Lyralii interjected, Marcus's approach to our relationship has been exactly the opposite. He's committed everything, held nothing in reserve, planned for permanence rather than contingencies. The observation caused an interesting silence as the various aliens processed this apparent contradiction. It was Ambassador Vex who spoke first. Captain Chen, how do you reconcile these two approaches? Professional caution versus personal commitment? Marcus considered the question seriously, his hand finding Lyralii's naturally as he thought. I think the difference is in what you're trying to protect, Ambassador. In military operations, I plan for failure because my primary job is to bring my people home alive. But, in love. He paused, looking at Lyralii with an expression of such complete devotion that several of the empathically sensitive species in their group shifted uncomfortably. In love, planning for failure is the failure, he finished simply. When you find something worth giving everything for, holding back guarantees you'll lose it. Emperor Zephyr studied his future son-in-law with obvious interest. And, you believe my daughter is worth giving everything for? Your Majesty, Marcus said, his voice carrying absolute conviction, your daughter is worth becoming everything for. She's made me a better person than I ever thought I could be. The Emperor's luminescence pattern shifted to what Lyralii recognized as deep approval mixed with paternal satisfaction. Captain Shen, when my daughter first told me of her intentions, I was concerned. Not because of your species, but because I feared she was making an emotional decision that would ultimately harm both your peoples. He gestured toward the garden around them, where representatives of dozens of species were mingling peacefully, their conversations animated by genuine curiosity rather than diplomatic necessity. I begin to see that I may have been wrong. This gathering represents something I haven't seen in my 2 centuries of rule, species coming together not because of political necessity or economic benefit, but because of hope. Hope that differences can be bridges rather than barriers. Prince Astra nodded enthusiastically. Father, some of the delegates have been discussing the possibility of cultural exchange programs, joint research initiatives, even collaborative art projects. They're seeing possibilities they never considered before. Because of our marriage? Lyralii asked, surprised. Because of what your marriage represents, Ambassador 3 corrected. If a Zephyrian princess and a human warrior can find common ground, perhaps other seemingly incompatible entities can as well. Sarah looked thoughtful. You know, in human culture, we have a saying, love conquers all. Most people think it means love is stronger than obstacles, but I think it means love finds a way around obstacles that people thought were impossible to overcome. The Zephyrian equivalent, Emperor Zephyr said with a slight smile, translates roughly as true connection transcends all boundaries. Perhaps our species have more wisdom in common than we realized. As the reception continued, Lyralii found herself amazed by the conversations happening around them. Delegates who had maintained formal diplomatic relationships for centuries were discovering shared interests and common ground. Scientists from different species were proposing joint research projects. Artists were discussing collaborative exhibitions. But what moved her most was watching Marcus interact with beings from cultures utterly foreign to his own. He listened more than he spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and somehow managed to find connections that surprised even the delegates themselves. When the Aquatic Coalition's representative mentioned their species' poetry tradition of flow singing, complex narratives performed through water movement, Marcus immediately connected it to human traditions of storytelling through dance. Within minutes, they were deep in conversation about the parallels between physical movement and emotional expression across species. When the Crystalline Authority's delegation explained their mathematical approach to beauty, calculating aesthetic perfection through geometric harmony, Marcus surprised them by discussing human architectural principles and the way certain mathematical ratios appeared in both human art and natural forms. How does he do that? Prince Astron asked quietly, watching Marcus help facilitate a conversation between species that had barely acknowledged each other's existence for decades. He looks for what they share instead of what divides them, Lyralii replied, her markings pulsing with pride. It's the same way he approached me. He didn't see an alien princess from a species known for pacifism. He saw someone who needed help, someone worth protecting, someone whose dreams aligned with his own. As the evening progressed, Lyralii realized that their wedding was becoming something far more significant than a personal ceremony. It was becoming a demonstration of possibility, a proof that the galaxy's countless differences could be sources of strength rather than division. But the true test would come tomorrow, when they stood before these same delegates and promised to love each other forever, to bridge the gap between their worlds through the strength of their commitment to each other. As the reception wound down and the delegates began returning to their ships for the night, Marcus and Lyralii found themselves alone in the garden for the first time all evening. The bioluminescent plants around them pulsed gently with the soft, warm colors of contentment and deep affection. Nervous about tomorrow? Marcus asked softly, his hand finding hers in the gentle twilight of the garden. Terrified, Lyralii admitted with a laugh. Not about marrying you, that's the easiest decision I've ever made. but about everything else. About whether we can live up to what everyone seems to think we represent. Marcus pulled her closer, and she marveled again at how perfectly they fit together despite their different physiologies. We don't have to represent anything except ourselves, Lyrelii. We just have to love each other and let everything else follow from that. Is it really that simple? She asked. The love part is, Marcus said with conviction. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. Together. As they stood together in the garden where flowers bloomed in response to their emotions, surrounded by the gentle glow of their happiness, neither of them could have imagined the challenges that would soon test their conviction that love was enough to overcome any obstacle. But, for now, in this moment, with the representatives of the galaxy preparing to witness their union, they knew with absolute certainty that whatever the future brought, they would face it hand in hand, heart to heart, stronger together than either could ever be alone. 6 months after their wedding had been celebrated across the galaxy as a symbol of unity and hope, Marcus and Lyrelii faced their first real crisis as a married couple. The emergency alarm that echoed through their shared quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Dawn was not the gentle chime used for routine communications, but the sharp, urgent tone reserved for immediate threats. Marcus was on his feet and reaching for his emergency gear before his conscious mind had fully processed the sound. Years of military training had programmed certain responses too deeply to override, and the sight of him moving with deadly efficiency while wearing nothing but sleep clothes would have been amusing under different circumstances. Lyrelii rolled gracefully from their bed, her forearms moving in perfect coordination as she activated the room's communication systems. Her luminescent markings, which had been pulsing gently with the contentment of sleep, now flared with sharp alertness. Harmony's Dawn, this is Princess Lyrelii. Report. Captain Sarah Chen's voice crackled through the speakers, tight with controlled tension. Your Highness, we're receiving distress signals from the Kepler colony. Multiple ships, heavy weapon signatures, and communications are being jammed. From what we can determine, it's a full-scale assault. Marcus paused in the middle of strapping on his armor, his expression grim. Sarah, what's our ETA to Kepler? 18 hours at maximum speed, Marcus. But, we're a diplomatic vessel with minimal defensive capabilities and a VIP passenger who cannot be put at risk. The unspoken implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Kepler colony was home to nearly 2 million beings from a dozen different species, including the largest population of Zephyrian refugees outside their home system. If the colony fell, it would be a humanitarian catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. But Marcus was bound by his marriage to protect Lyrelii, and she was too valuable politically to risk in a combat zone. The calculus was simple and brutal. They could not reach the colony in time to make a military difference, and attempting to do so would likely result in the loss of the galaxy's most visible symbol of interspecies cooperation. Lyrelii's markings pulsed with a pattern Marcus had learned to recognize as her deepest thinking mode. Captain Chen, what do we know about the attacking forces? Preliminary sensor data suggests they're using Raider-class vessels with some kind of modified weaponry. The energy signatures don't match anything in our current databases. Raider-class vessels, Marcus repeated grimly. That means this isn't random piracy. Raider clans don't operate in groups large enough to assault a major colony unless someone's paying them very, very well. Lyrelii moved to the room's tactical display, her graceful fingers dancing over the controls as she called up star charts and shipping manifests. Or unless someone has provided them with information about Kepler's defenses and patrol schedules. The implications of her observations settled over the room like ice. Kepler colony was supposed to be protected by rotating patrols from 3 different coalition fleets. For the raiders to time their attack to avoid those patrols suggested inside knowledge. Marcus finished sealing his armor and moved to stand beside his wife at the tactical display. Lyrelii, we need to talk about our options here. She turned to face him, and he saw in her luminescent features the same conflict that was tearing at his own heart. Her people's commitment to peace ran deeper than political policy, it was woven into the fabric of Zephyrian identity. But her humanitarian instincts were warring with her cultural programming, and the result was visible in the erratic pulsing of her bioluminescent markings. Tell me what you're thinking, she said softly. Marcus gestured toward the star chart displaying Kepler's position relative to their own. Tactically, we have 3 choices. We can continue to our original destination and report the attack to Coalition Command, knowing that any response will arrive too late to save the colony. We can alter course for Kepler and risk losing both you and this ship without being able to affect the outcome. Or, Lyralii prompted. Or we find a fourth option that no one has considered yet, Marcus finished, unconsciously echoing words she had spoken to him months ago about finding new paths when existing choices all led to harm. Lyralii's markings suddenly stabilized into a pattern Marcus had never seen before, deep blues and purples shot through with veins of brilliant gold. Marcus, what if the attack on Kepler isn't the real objective? Explain. She manipulated the star chart, expanding it to show a broader view of the local systems. Look at Kepler's position. It's not strategically valuable in itself, it's a refugee settlement with minimal industrial capacity and no significant military installations. But it sits directly on the trade route between the Zephyrian Empire and the Mollusk Confederation. Marcus studied the display with growing understanding. An attack on Kepler would disrupt trade, certainly, but, more importantly, it would force the Zephyrian Empire to choose between maintaining our neutrality and protecting our people, Lyralii finished grimly. If we respond militarily, we compromise our status as neutral mediators. If we don't respond, we appear weak and abandon our own refugees to their fate. The tactical brilliance of the attack became clear. Whoever had orchestrated it understood that the real target wasn't the colony itself, but the Zephyrian Empire's political position in the galaxy. Marcus activated the ship's communication system. Sarah, patch me through to Coalition Command. Priority Alpha authorization. Marcus, Lyralii said quietly, if you call in Coalition forces, you'll be dragging humanity into what's essentially a Zephyrian internal matter. That's exactly what the attackers want. And if I don't, 2 million innocent people die while we debate political ramifications. The pain in his voice was audible, and Lyralii felt her own heart breaking as she watched the man she loved struggle with an impossible choice. Everything about Marcus's character demanded that he act to protect the innocent, regardless of political consequences. But everything about their marriage required him to consider the broader implications of his actions. There is another way, she said slowly. But it requires us to trust each other completely and accept that we might both be destroyed in the attempt. Marcus turned to face her fully. I'm listening. Lyralii moved to the room's secondary console and began pulling up files that Marcus recognized as diplomatic records and cultural databases. The Raider clans operate according to their own code of honor. Brutal and primitive by most species standards, but consistent. They respect strength, despise weakness, and value direct confrontation above subterfuge. Meaning? Meaning that if someone hired them to attack Kepler, they probably don't fully understand the political implications. They see a well-paying contract to attack a defenseless target. But, if we can reframe the situation. Marcus was beginning to see where her thoughts were leading. You want to challenge them directly. I want to offer them something they value more than their current contract, Lyralii corrected. Single combat, with terms that give them more honor and profit than they could gain from slaughtering refugees. The idea was so audacious that Marcus had to remind himself to breathe. Lyralii, Raider combat trials are to the death. And they don't exactly have a reputation for fighting fair. Which is why you'll be representing the human warrior tradition, and I'll be representing the Zephyrian diplomatic tradition. Together. Marcus stared at her as the full implications of her proposal became clear. You're suggesting we offer to face their champions in paired combat. If we win, they abandon the attack and reveal who hired them. If we lose, we die together, but the political crisis dies with us. The Zephyrian Empire's neutrality remains intact, and the galaxy doesn't get dragged into a war that could destabilize everything we've worked to build. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of their decision. Marcus had faced death countless times in his military career, but always in service to clear objectives with measurable outcomes. This was different. This was gambling everything, their lives, their love, their shared future, on a desperate gambit that might not even work. But, as he looked at Lyralii's luminescent features, her markings pulsing with determination and love in equal measure, he realized that she was right. Not about the tactical situation, though her analysis was sound. She was right about them. They were stronger together than either could be alone. His military skills and her diplomatic insight could complement each other in ways that might surprise even the Raider clans. And if they were going to die, better to die fighting for something they believed in than to live knowing they had chosen safety over the lives of innocent people. How do we contact them? He asked simply. Lyraliai's markings flared with relief and pride as she realized he was committed to their shared decision. Raider clans monitor standard emergency frequencies for potential targets. If we broadcast an honor challenge on the right channels, they'll hear it, Marcus finished. And their code will require them to respond. Lyraliai moved to the communication console, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. Sarah, we need to establish communication with the attacking forces at Kepler Colony. Captain Chen's voice carried obvious confusion. Your Highness, I'm not sure that's tactically advisable. Captain, Marcus interjected, we're about to do something that's either brilliant or incredibly stupid. Either way, we need you to trust us. The communication system crackled with static as Sarah worked to establish a connection across the vast distances involved. While they waited, Marcus and Lyraliai stood together, their different forms creating a study in contrasts, his human solidity and her Zephyrian grace, his military bearing and her diplomatic elegance. Are you sure about this? Marcus asked softly. No, Lyraliai admitted with characteristic honesty. But I'm sure about us. And I'm sure that love means being willing to risk everything for what matters most. The communication system suddenly burst to life with a harsh, guttural voice speaking in the crude patois used by Raider clans across the galaxy. Unknown vessel, you interrupt glorious conquest. Speak quickly or be destroyed. Lyraliai stepped forward, her diplomatic training taking over as she prepared to negotiate for the lives of 2 million people with beings who respected only strength and violence. I am Princess Lyraliai of the Zephyrian Empire, she said, her melodic voice carrying clearly through the static. I claim right of honor combat for the lives of Kepler Colony. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus wondered if the transmission had failed. Then, the Raider voice returned, tinged with what might have been surprise. Zephyrian Princess offers combat? Soft-skinned diplomat thinks to fight Raider champions? The princess fights with her husband, Marcus interrupted, stepping beside Lyraliai so that the visual transmission would show both of them. Captain Marcus Chen, Terran Defense Corps. I claim warrior's right to stand beside my wife in this challenge. This time the silence stretched even longer, and, when the Raider spoke again, his voice carried a note of what might have been respect. Human warrior and alien princess offer paired combat for colony lives? This is unusual. But honor demands answer. What terms do you propose? Lyraliai's training took over completely as she began the delicate process of negotiating conditions that would give them some chance of survival while offering the Raiders enough honor and profit to make abandoning their current contract worthwhile. Trial by combat, champions rules, to the death or yield, she said formally. If we prevail, you abandon this attack and reveal the identity of your employers. You keep any payment already received, and gain the honor of having faced the galaxy's most unlikely warrior pair. And if we prevail, the Raider voice asked with obvious amusement. Then, you complete your contract with the knowledge that you defeated beings foolish enough to challenge you without hope of victory, Marcus replied. The political crisis you were hired to create dies with us, but your reputation as invincible warriors spreads across the galaxy. Another long silence followed as the Raiders presumably discussed the proposal among themselves. Marcus and Lyraliai waited, hands clasped, knowing that their fate and the fate of Kepler Colony hung on the decision of beings they had never met, whose culture they barely understood. When the Raider voice returned, it carried a tone of decisive authority. Terms are acceptable. But we choose combat forms and location. You will face our champions in traditional Raider trial circles, with weapons of our selection. Agreed, Lyraliai said before Marcus could object. How long do we have to reach the combat site? 12 hours, the Raider replied. Coordinates are being transmitted. Princess and warrior, you show courage in offering to die for weaklings who cannot defend themselves. This brings honor to both your species. The transmission ended, leaving Marcus and Lyralii alone with the magnitude of what they had just committed themselves to. In 12 hours, they would face unknown champions in unfamiliar combat with weapons they might never have used before. Marcus turned to his wife, marveling again at her calm in the face of mortal danger. "Any second thoughts?" "Hundreds," Lyralii replied honestly. "But none strong enough to change my mind. Marcus, regardless of what happens in 12 hours, I want you to know that these months as your wife have been the happiest of my life." He pulled her close, feeling the warmth of her bioluminescent skin against his armor. "Mine too. And, Lyralii, whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." As they held each other in the quiet of their quarters, neither fully acknowledged the fear that gripped them both. They had found love across the vast differences between their species, had learned to bridge gaps that seemed impossible to cross. But tomorrow would test whether love was truly strong enough to overcome everything, or whether some challenges were simply too great for even the most devoted hearts to survive. Outside their window, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the drama playing out among the tiny creatures who had learned to travel between them. In 12 hours, two of those creatures would risk everything they had built together for the chance to save strangers they would never meet. It was, perhaps, the most human thing Marcus had ever done. And the most Zephyrian thing Lyralii had ever attempted. Which meant, in the strange logic of their love, it was exactly what both of them needed to do. The Raider combat arena was unlike anything Marcus or Lyralii had imagined. Carved into the hollowed-out hull of a massive derelict battleship floating in the void between star systems, it combined the brutal functionality of Raider engineering with the grim artistry of a culture that had elevated violence to a form of religious expression. As their shuttle docked with the makeshift arena, Marcus felt the familiar calm that always settled over him before combat. His armor had been replaced with the simple leather and metal garments required by Raider tradition, and the weapon harness across his back held unfamiliar blades that he had spent the journey learning to use. Beside him, Lyralii looked ethereal in the flowing combat robes that Raider culture demanded for non-warrior participants. Her forearms were adorned with the traditional bracers that would allow her to defend herself if necessary, but Raider law prohibited her from carrying lethal weapons unless she claimed warrior status, a designation that would automatically disqualify Marcus from fighting beside her. "Remember," she said softly as they walked through the ship's darkened corridors toward the arena, "Raider combat is as much about psychological warfare as physical skill. They'll try to intimidate us, to make us lose focus." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "And remember what I taught you about reading combat patterns. Even if you can't fight directly, you can warn me about attacks I might not see coming." They had spent the 12-hour journey preparing as thoroughly as possible for an encounter they couldn't fully prepare for. Marcus had drilled with the unfamiliar Raider weapons while Lyralii studied everything available about Raider combat traditions and psychology. They had practiced moving together, communicating through subtle gestures, coordinating their different strengths into something approaching unified action. But nothing had truly prepared them for the sight that greeted them when they emerged into the arena itself. The space was enormous, large enough to hold atmospheric combat with gravity generators providing Earth-normal conditions. Massive screens around the arena's perimeter displayed the action to spectators throughout the Raider fleet, while elevated platforms held the clan leaders who would judge the combat according to their ancient traditions. And, waiting for them in the center of the arena were their opponents. The first was a massive humanoid creature that Marcus recognized as a Korthak warrior, a species known throughout the galaxy for their incredible strength and near-impenetrable hide. Standing nearly 8 feet tall and covered in natural armor plates, Brutus the Bonecrusher lived up to his reputation as one of the most feared champions in Raider space. The second was smaller but somehow more terrifying, a Venomtail from the Outer Rim, whose species had evolved as ambush predators with lightning-fast reflexes and paralytic toxins. Saren the Silent moved with the fluid grace of something that had never known fear, her 6 limbs allowing for combat maneuvers that few other species could match. "Well," Marcus murmured, trying to keep his voice light, "at least they sent their best." Lyralii's markings pulsed with what he had learned was her expression of grim determination. "The Korthak will rely on brute force and intimidation. The Venomtail will try for quick, precise strikes with her natural toxins. But neither of them expects us to fight as a coordinated unit." A harsh voice echoed through the arena as the Raider leader began the traditional pre-combat announcement. "Behold! The alien princess and her human warrior come to die for weaklings who cannot defend themselves. The gathered raiders cheered with bloodthirsty enthusiasm, their voices echoing off the arena's metal walls like thunder. They face our greatest champions. Brutus the Bone Crusher, whose fists have shattered starship hulls. Saren the Silent, whose venom has ended the lives of 100 warriors. More cheering, louder now, as the crowd worked itself into the frenzy that raider culture demanded for ritual combat. Let the trial begin. May the strongest survive, and may the weak feed the void. The arena fell silent as the combatants faced each other across the sand-covered floor. Marcus could feel Lyraliai's tension beside him, but when he glanced at her, her expression was calm and focused. Whatever fear she felt, she was channeling it into concentration. Brutus moved first, his massive form charging across the arena with surprising speed for something so large. Marcus had expected this. Korthak warriors typically open combat with overwhelming displays of force, trying to end fights quickly before their opponents could adapt to their strength. But, instead of meeting the charge head-on, Marcus did something that surprised everyone in the arena, including his opponents. He dropped low and rolled to the side, while Lyraliai moved in perfect coordination to his original position. The maneuver left Brutus facing Lyraliai instead of Marcus, and Korthak tradition prohibited male warriors from striking female non-combatants without formal challenge. The massive warrior stumbled to a halt, confused by the unexpected tactic. In that moment of hesitation, Marcus struck. His unfamiliar blade found the gap between Brutus's natural armor plates, not deep enough to cause serious damage but sufficient to draw first blood and establish that this would not be the easy victory the Korthak had expected. Brutus roared with pain and fury, spinning toward Marcus with renewed aggression. But now Saren the Silent was moving, her 6 limbs carrying her in a complex pattern that would bring her venomous claws into range of Marcus's unprotected back. Behind you, left high. Lyraliai called out, her diplomatic training allowing her to communicate clearly even in the chaos of combat. Marcus ducked and spun, his blade intercepting Saren's strike with a clash that sent sparks across the arena floor. The venom tail was faster than anything Marcus had ever fought, but speed meant nothing if your opponent knew exactly where you were going to be. And Lyraliai, with her diplomatic training in reading body language and predicting behavior, was proving to be an invaluable combat coordinator. Brutus, 3 steps, right cross, she called, and Marcus was already moving before the massive Korthak's fist whistled through the space where his head had been. The crowd was beginning to murmur with something approaching respect. They had expected the alien princess and her human warrior to be overwhelmed within minutes. Instead, they were witnessing something unprecedented, a fighting style that combined individual skill with perfect coordination, turning 2 fighters into something greater than the sum of their parts. Saren attempted to capitalize on Marcus's focus on Brutus by launching herself in a spinning attack that would have been impossible to counter with conventional fighting techniques. But Marcus and Lyraliai had prepared for exactly this kind of multi-opponent situation. As Saren spun through the air, Lyraliai moved with fluid grace to intercept her trajectory. Despite being prohibited from using lethal weapons, Zephyrian martial arts included techniques for redirecting an opponent's momentum, and Saren found herself thrown off course by a perfectly timed push from 2 of Lyraliai's forearms. The venom tail landed hard, her usual grace disrupted by the unexpected intervention. In that moment of vulnerability, Marcus was there, his blade stopping just short of her throat. "Yield," he said quietly, "and you live to fight again." The arena fell completely silent. Saren the Silent, one of the most feared assassins in Raider space, was staring up at a human warrior who could have killed her but chose instead to offer mercy. After a long moment, Saren nodded slowly. "I yield to the strange warriors who fight with honor." The crowd exploded into shocked roars as Saren withdrew from the combat circle. Never in the recorded history of Raider trials had a defeated champion been offered mercy. Never had a human shown such restraint in the heat of battle. But Brutus the Bone Crusher was not finished. The massive Korthak's eyes blazed with fury as he realized he would have to face both opponents alone. "Coward's mercy," he bellowed. "I will show you how real warriors fight." What followed was the most intense combat of Marcus's career. Brutus fought with the desperate fury of someone whose entire identity was tied to his reputation as an unstoppable force. His massive fists hammered the arena floor hard enough to create craters, his natural armor deflecting strikes that should have ended the fight. But Marcus had something Brutus didn't expect: a partner who knew him well enough to predict his needs before he knew them himself. When Brutus's charge backed Marcus against the arena wall, Lyralii was there to provide the perfect angle for a counterattack. When the Korthak's devastating backhand would have caught Marcus off guard, Lyralii's warning allowed him to turn the blow into an opportunity for a joint lock that used Brutus's own momentum against him. They moved together like dancers, like lovers, like two beings who had learned to think with one mind while fighting with two bodies. It was beautiful in its coordination, and absolutely terrifying in its effectiveness. The end came suddenly. Brutus, exhausted by his own fury and confused by fighting tactics he had never encountered, overextended himself in a massive overhead strike that would have crushed Marcus if it had connected. Instead, Marcus stepped inside the attack, using techniques Lyralii had taught him from Zephyrian martial arts to redirect the force harmlessly past him. Brutus's own momentum carried him forward, off balance and vulnerable. Marcus's blade found the gap at the base of Brutus's skull, not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to sever the nerve cluster that controlled motor function in Korthak physiology. Brutus collapsed, paralyzed but alive, his eyes wide with shock and something that might have been respect. The arena fell silent again as Marcus stepped back, breathing hard but victorious. Beside him, Lyralii's markings pulsed with pride, exhaustion, and relief in equal measure. The Raider leader's voice echoed through the stunned silence. Impossible. Our greatest champions, defeated by, how did they do this? Marcus looked up at the observation platforms where the clan leaders sat in obvious shock. We fought together, he said simply. As partners, as equals, as beings who trust each other completely. He gestured toward Lyralii with one hand while keeping his weapon ready with the other. My wife knows my fighting patterns well enough to predict what I'll need before I know it myself. I know her diplomatic insights well enough to trust her tactical assessments without question. But, more than that, Lyralii added, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics, we fight for something larger than personal glory. We fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to bridge the gaps between species that seem insurmountable. The Raider leader stood slowly from his elevated platform. You have won by our laws and customs. Speak your terms. Marcus exchanged a look with Lyralii, and she nodded slightly. This was the moment they had risked everything for: the chance to save Kepler Colony and expose whoever had hired the Raiders to attack innocent refugees. First, Marcus said loudly enough for everyone in the arena to hear, you will withdraw from Kepler Colony immediately and allow the refugees to continue their lives in peace. Agreed, the Raider leader replied formally. Second, Lyralii continued, you will reveal the identity of whoever hired you to attack the colony, and you will provide evidence of their involvement. The Raider leader's expression grew thoughtful. This may cause complications. Our employers expected their involvement to remain secret. Marcus smiled grimly. Then, they should have hired warriors with more honor than to be defeated by an alien princess and her human husband. The insult was carefully calculated to appeal to Raider pride while giving them a face-saving way to break their original contract. If they could claim that their employers had insulted their abilities by choosing inadequate champions, they could abandon the contract while maintaining their reputation. The Raider leader's expression shifted to what might have been amusement. You understand our culture better than we expected, human warrior. Very well. The contract came from agents of the hegemony of pure thought, a faction that believes the galaxy would be better served by eliminating what they call genetic contamination between species. The revelation sent a chill through Marcus and Lyralii. The hegemony was a secretive organization that had been linked to several attacks on mixed-species colonies and diplomatic facilities. If they were actively working to undermine interspecies cooperation, the implications went far beyond the attack on Kepler Colony. Do you have proof of their involvement? Lyralii asked. The Raider leader gestured to one of his subordinates, who approached with a datapad. Communication records, payment authorizations, and tactical intelligence they provided about Kepler's defenses. Everything you need to expose their involvement. As the datapad was handed over, Marcus realized that their desperate gambit had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. Not only had they saved Kepler Colony, but they had uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that threatened the stability of the entire galactic coalition. But, as they prepared to leave the arena, Saren the Silent approached them with an expression of curiosity that surprised everyone present. "Princess, warrior," she said in her sibilant voice, "your fighting style, it is unlike anything we have encountered. How did you learn to coordinate so perfectly?" Lyralii and Marcus exchanged another of their meaningful looks. "We learned by loving each other completely," Lyralii replied simply. "When you trust someone with your life, your heart, and your future, fighting together becomes natural." "Love," Saren repeated the word as if tasting something foreign. "Is this the human concept of mating bonds?" "More than that," Marcus said. "Love is choosing to grow together instead of alone. It's deciding that your partner's well-being is as important as your own. It's finding ways to make each other stronger rather than competing for dominance." The gathered raiders listened to this explanation with obvious fascination. In their culture, strength was individual and relationships were based on dominance hierarchies. The idea of mutual empowerment was genuinely alien to them. As Marcus and Lyralii left the arena, they carried with them not only the proof they needed to expose the hegemony's conspiracy, but the knowledge that their love had accomplished something unprecedented. They had shown beings who worshipped strength that there were forms of power greater than individual prowess, that cooperation could achieve victories impossible through conflict alone. The journey back to coalition space would give them time to process the full implications of what they had learned and what they had accomplished. But, for now, as they held each other in the shuttle that carried them away from the Raider fleet, they knew that they had passed their first great test as a married couple. They had risked everything for strangers and emerged stronger than ever. They had faced death together and chosen life together. They had proven that love was not just a personal emotion, but a force capable of changing the galaxy itself. And, in the depths of space, as their shuttle carried them toward home, the galaxy's most unlikely warrior couple began planning their next impossible victory against the forces that would divide rather than unite the countless species trying to build a better future among the stars. 1 year after their triumph in the Raider arena, Marcus and Lyralii stood before the assembled Galactic Council in the grandest chamber on the coalition capital world of Concordia. But, this time, they were not there to announce their engagement or defend their right to love each other. They stood as witnesses to the transformation their union had helped bring about across the galaxy. The evidence they had recovered from the Raider fleet had exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of several coalition governments. The hegemony of pure thought had been revealed as a shadowy organization with cells embedded in dozens of species leadership, all working toward the same goal: the elimination of interspecies cooperation and the return to isolated, single-species empires. But, what had started as a simple intelligence briefing had evolved into something far more significant. As the investigations had progressed and the scope of the conspiracy had become clear, the Galaxy Coalition had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the fragility of their unity and the depth of the prejudices that still divided the species of known space. "Honored delegates," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the massive chamber, "when Princess Lyralii and I first announced our engagement, many of you saw it as a curiosity, a political complication, or a dangerous precedent. Few saw it as what it actually was: a demonstration that the differences between our species could be bridges rather than barriers." He gestured toward the holographic displays that showed the results of the year-long investigation. The hegemony succeeded in placing agents throughout coalition space because they understood something we had failed to acknowledge: that our unity was more ceremonial than actual, more political convenience than genuine cooperation. Lyralii stepped forward, her forearms gracefully positioned in the formal stance of diplomatic address, her markings pulsing with the measured rhythms that indicated careful thought among her people. "The attack on Kepler colony was designed to force my people to choose between our neutrality and our compassion," she said, her melodic voice carrying notes of both sadness and determination. "The hegemony calculated that either choice would weaken the coalition. If we responded militarily, our neutrality would be compromised, and if we remained passive, we would appear weak and unreliable." Ambassador Threek of the Mollusk Confederation raised one tentacle in the traditional gesture for requesting permission to speak. "Princess, Captain Shen, your actions prevented that particular crisis, but surely you understand that the underlying problem remains. How can species with fundamentally different approaches to conflict resolution truly unite?" It was Emperor Zephyr who answered, rising from his position in the Zephyrian delegation with the dignity of someone who had ruled wisely for centuries. Ambassador Threek, that question assumes that unity requires uniformity, the Emperor said, his luminescent features pulsing with gentle authority. But, my daughter and her husband have shown us something different. They have demonstrated that strength comes not from eliminating differences, but from learning to blend them into something greater than any single approach could achieve. He gestured toward Marcus and Lyralii, pride evident in his bioluminescent expressions. In their trial by combat with the Raider champions, they did not succeed by choosing between human aggression and Zephyrian pacifism. They succeeded by combining human tactical skill with Zephyrian strategic thinking, human protective instincts with Zephyrian diplomatic wisdom. Ambassador Vex of the Crystal and Authority stood, her faceted features reflecting the chamber's lights in complex patterns. Your Majesty, while their personal success is admirable, how does it translate to policy-level cooperation? Individual relationships are one thing, but governance requires systematic approaches. Marcus exchanged a look with Lyralii, and she nodded slightly, a communication so subtle that most of the delegates missed it, but so complete that they could have coordinated complex actions based on that tiny gesture alone. Ambassador Vax, Marcus said, that's exactly what we're here to propose. Not just personal relationships between species, but institutional partnerships that combine different strengths in systematic ways. He activated the chamber's main display, showing a series of detailed proposals that had been developed over the past year with input from representatives of every major coalition species. What if coalition defense wasn't just a matter of assigning patrol duties to whoever was available in a given sector? Marcus continued. What if we deliberately paired human tactical expertise with Zephyrian diplomatic intelligence? Silicon Authority computational power with mollusk biological adaptation capabilities? Lyralii took over the presentation seamlessly. What if trade disputes weren't just resolved by whoever had the strongest economy or the best lawyers, but by teams that combined different cultural approaches to negotiation and conflict resolution? The display shifted to show case studies where such combinations had already been tested on a small scale. In every instance, mixed species teams had achieved results that single species groups had been unable to match. The hegemony of pure thought succeeded in their infiltration because they understood that our current approach to unity is fundamentally superficial, Lyralii continued. We meet, we vote, we compromise, but we don't truly integrate. We remain separate species working together when convenient, rather than becoming something new and stronger. Ambassador Zelthrin of the Silicon Courts processed this information with the rapid clicking sounds that indicated intensive calculation among his species. Princess, Captain Chen, you are proposing a fundamental restructuring of coalition governance. The computational requirements alone. Which is why we need Silicon Authority processing power integrated with organic species' intuitive problem-solving capabilities, Marcus interrupted with a slight smile. Separately, those challenges are overwhelming. Together, they become manageable. Prince Astron stepped forward from the Zephyrian delegation, his excitement evident in the rapid pulsing of his bioluminescent markings. Honored delegates, I've been working with research teams from 12 different species on exactly these kinds of integration projects. The preliminary results are extraordinary. He activated a secondary display showing data from joint research initiatives. Mixed species engineering teams are developing technologies that neither species could have created alone. Multicultural diplomatic corps are resolving conflicts that have persisted for decades. Integrated military units are achieving tactical successes that would have been impossible with single-species forces. A new voice entered the discussion as Admiral Sarachin stepped forward from the Terran delegation. Over the past year, she had transitioned from starship engineering to serving as liaison between human military forces and coalition-integrated units. Delegates, she said with characteristic directness, I've seen these integrated approaches work in practice. When my engineering teams partner with mollusk bioadaptation specialists and Silicon Authority computational experts, we don't just solve problems faster, we solve problems that none of us even knew existed. She gestured toward Marcus and Lyralii. My brother and Princess Lyralii didn't just survive their trial by combat because they loved each other. They survived because they had learned to think as a unit while maintaining their individual strengths. That's what we're proposing for the coalition as a whole. Ambassador Threek's tentacles coiled in what Lyralii had learned to recognize as deep consideration among his species. Admiral Chen, Princess Lyrelii, your proposals are intriguing. But they require a level of trust between species that has never existed in galactic history. Which brings us to the heart of the matter, Lyrelii said softly. Trust isn't built through treaties and trade agreements. Trust is built through shared experiences, mutual vulnerability, and the willingness to risk something precious for each other's benefit. She moved to stand beside Marcus, their different forms creating the visual symbol of interspecies cooperation that had become familiar across the galaxy over the past year. A year ago, Marcus and I risked our lives for people we had never met, of species we barely understood, for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. We discovered that love, real, committed, sacrificial love, is not just a personal emotion, but a political force powerful enough to change the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. Marcus nodded, his hand finding hers naturally. Every delegate in this chamber represents species that have achieved remarkable things. The Mollusk Confederation has mastered biological sciences that seem like magic to the rest of us. The Crystalline Authority processes information in ways that boggle organic minds. The Silicon Courts have created art that moves beings to tears across species barriers. His voice grew stronger as he warmed to his theme. But all of these achievements happened in isolation. What if the Mollusk Confederation's biological mastery was combined with human protective instincts and Zephyrian philosophical wisdom? What if Silicon Authority processing power was enhanced by organic intuition and guided by crystalline aesthetic principles? The chamber fell silent as the delegates absorbed the full scope of what was being proposed. This wasn't just a new treaty or trade agreement. This was a fundamental reimagining of how different species could coexist in the galaxy. It was Ambassador Vex who finally broke the silence. Captain Chen, Princess Lyrelii, what you're describing sounds remarkably like a marriage, Lyrelii finished with a gentle smile. A commitment to grow together rather than merely coexist. A choice to become something new without losing what makes each species unique. And, like any marriage, Marcus added, it requires trust, commitment, and the willingness to put the relationship's well-being ahead of individual convenience. Emperor Zephyr rose again, his ancient wisdom evident in every graceful movement. Honored delegates, I have lived for over 4 centuries and witnessed countless attempts at galactic unity. They have all failed because they were based on the assumption that cooperation requires compromise, that working together means giving up what makes each species strong. His luminescent markings pulsed with deep conviction. My daughter and her husband have shown us a different path. They have demonstrated that true unity comes not from eliminating differences, but from weaving them together into something stronger than any individual thread. He gestured toward the assembled delegates. The hegemony of pure thought nearly succeeded in destroying everything we have built together. They succeeded in infiltrating our governments, manipulating our fears, and turning our differences against us because we had not truly committed to each other. His voice grew stronger, more authoritative. I propose that we respond to their challenge not with more of the same superficial cooperation they were able to exploit, but with the kind of deep integration that would make such infiltration impossible. Prince Astron stepped forward eagerly. Father, the research teams have already developed preliminary frameworks for integrated governance. Mixed species councils with rotating leadership based on expertise rather than political influence. Joint military commands that combine different tactical traditions. Shared research facilities where different approaches to problem-solving enhance rather than compete with each other. Ambassador Zelfrin's calculations had apparently reached a conclusion. The computational models suggest that such integration would indeed be more efficient than current approaches. The question is whether organic species can adapt to the level of coordination required. The question, corrected Marcus with a slight smile, is whether we're willing to trust each other enough to try. Sarah Chen activated another display showing the results of pilot programs that had been running quietly for the past year. Delegates, we've already begun testing these approaches on a limited scale. Joint engineering projects, integrated patrol units, mixed species diplomatic teams. The results speak for themselves. The data was impressive. Integrated teams consistently outperformed single species groups in every measurable category. Conflict resolution times dropped dramatically when different cultural approaches were combined. Innovation increased exponentially when different thought patterns were allowed to enhance each other. But what captured the delegates' attention most was a series of testimonials from participants in the pilot programs. Beings from dozens of species describing how working closely with other species had not diminished their own cultural identity, but had actually helped them understand their unique strengths more clearly. "You see," Lyralei said softly, "this is what Marcus taught me. When you love someone deeply, it doesn't make you less yourself, it makes you more yourself than you ever thought possible." The same principle applies to species relationships. She gestured toward the testimonials. "Working closely with human tactical thinking didn't make me less Zephyrian, it made me a better Zephyrian diplomat because I learned to see situations from perspectives I never would have considered alone." Marcus nodded in agreement. "And learning Zephyrian philosophical approaches didn't make me less human, it made me a more effective human warrior because I learned to consider long-term consequences and strategic implications that pure tactical thinking might miss." The chamber buzzed with quiet conversations as delegates discussed the implications among themselves. This was clearly not a decision that could be made in a single session, but the enthusiasm in many of the conversations suggested that the idea was taking root. Ambassador Threek raised a tentacle for attention. "Captain Chen, Princess Lyralei, assuming the coalition decides to pursue this path, what would be the first practical steps?" Lyralei and Marcus exchanged another of their perfect communication moments before Marcus answered. "We propose starting with voluntary pilot programs in each major area of coalition activity. Species that are interested can begin experimenting with integrated approaches while those who prefer traditional methods continue as before." But, Lyralei added with gentle firmness, participation in integrated programs requires real commitment. Not just political cooperation, but genuine partnership. The willingness to be vulnerable, to learn from each other, to grow together. Like a marriage, Ambassador Vex observed with what might have been amusement among her species. "Exactly like a marriage," Marcus confirmed. "Because that's what this really is, a proposal for the species of the galaxy to marry each other. To commit to a future where we grow stronger together rather than merely coexist separately." As the session began to wind down and the delegates prepared to return to their home systems for consultation with their governments, the mood in the chamber had shifted dramatically from the skepticism that had greeted similar proposals in the past. Emperor Zethys approached Marcus and Lyralei as the crowds began to disperse. "My children, when you first told me of your intention to marry, I worried that you were making a decision that would compromise both your people's interests." His luminescent features pulsed with paternal pride and deep satisfaction. "I was wrong. You have not compromised anything. You have shown us all how to become more than we ever thought possible." As they walked together through the corridors of the coalition capital, Marcus and Lyralei reflected on the journey that had brought them from that first shocking announcement to this moment of galactic transformation. "Do you think it will work?" Marcus asked quietly. "This grand experiment in species marriage?" Lyralei's markings pulsed with the deep contentment he had learned to associate with her most profound certainties. "I think love always works, Marcus. Maybe not the way we expect, maybe not as quickly as we hope, but it always finds a way to create something beautiful." She looked up at him with an expression of such complete devotion that it took his breath away even after all these months of marriage. "We didn't set out to transform galactic civilization. We just set out to love each other completely and see what happened." "And what happened," Marcus said with wonder, "is that we learned love is bigger than we ever imagined. Big enough to change not just our lives, but the destiny of every species among the stars." As they stood together on the observation deck, looking out at the ships departing for dozens of different worlds to carry the message of potential unity to their home governments, they knew that their story was just beginning. They had proven that a human warrior and a Zephyrian princess could love each other across impossible differences. They had shown that such love could overcome challenges that should have destroyed them. And now they were about to discover whether love was powerful enough to unite an entire galaxy of different species in bonds stronger than fear, prejudice, and the ancient divisions that had kept them apart. Looking out at the stars that had once seemed to separate the species of the galaxy, Marcus and Lyralei saw instead the connections that could bind them all together. And, in the depths of space, their love story continued to unfold, no longer just the tale of two individuals who had found each other across impossible odds, but the beginning of a galactic marriage that would reshape the destiny of countless worlds. The human warrior and the Zephyrian princess had started as symbols of what was possible between different species. But, as they held each other in the starlight streaming through the observation deck's crystal walls, they realized they had become something even more significant, living proof that love was indeed the most powerful force in the universe, capable of transforming not just hearts and minds, but entire civilizations. Their story had begun with the simple desire to love each other completely. It would end with a galaxy united by the realization that love, real, committed, transformational love, was the key to everything they had ever dreamed of achieving among the stars.